I've got a feeling I've been here before, in a jungle, in a dirty little war. Young men can die so fast, my God, let's not repeat the past. I got a feeling I've been here before. Saigon, Managua, Cameron Bay, Kosovo, Incheon, Kuwait away. What difference does our name make if we make the same mistake? I got a feeling I've been here before.
Folks, my name's Art McDonald, and again, thanks to Merrimack College, especially the Center for Jewish, Christian, and Muslim Relations. My brother and friend Borg, thanks for hosting this wonderful event. I just met Bruce Gagnon this evening, so it's a privilege to have you here with us, Bruce, and a privilege for me to know something of your history. I did a little research this afternoon about Bruce, and you know, it strikes me that we all have a journey, and we all have a story, and for most of us, particularly when you start looking like this, the journey's taken many different kind of routes, and we wind up in places that we didn't really begin in. So I was struck by the fact that early in his career, Bruce actually helped get Richard Nixon elected president of the United States as a young Republican. So we all start somewhere. And after his military experience in the Air Force and the profound things that happened for all of us who spent time in the military and eventually finding himself with the Veterans for Peace, I think, and this is an irony of history, but many times what happens to us in the military actually turns our lives around rather than deepens us in that direction. And it certainly has been the case with so many of us. He cut his teeth organizing with Cesar Chavez, a great American who taught so many how to organize and how to bring justice to the table. And since 1982 has been working on weapons in space and trying to raise consciousness about the danger of what we're facing. I just want to read this little part from the web just so that you know his recent accomplishments. To raise awareness of what is at stake, Bruce speaks internationally and has written for publications such as Earth, Island Journal, Counterpunch, Z Magazine, Space News, National Catholic Reporter, Asia Times, Le Monde Diplomatique, and the Canadian Dimension. He's produced 2 videos, one in 2003 called The Arsenal of Hypocrisy, and in 2005, a video entitled Battle for America's Soul. He also has published a book which is available for purchase called Come Together Right Now, Organizing Stories from a Fading Empire. He's also part of a publication out of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space, Space Alert it's called. And in 2003, Dr. Helen Caldecott named Bruce a senior fellow at the Nuclear Research Policy Institute, where he also serves on the advisory board of directors. Pleasure and a privilege to have you with us tonight, Bruce.
Thank you all very much for being here. It's very nice to be with you all. Great honor. This, as some of you know, is Keep Space for Peace Week. It began on October 2nd, runs through October 9th, a time when there'll be activities similar to this, protests, all different kinds of film showings in 12 different countries around the world talking about what's going on with the space program. So it's really important for me to be here with you all. I'm very happy to be here with you, especially because of your relationship to Raytheon. The Global Network was started in 1992 when those of us, at that time I was living in Florida working for the Florida Coalition for Peace and Justice, we saw that the space program had been taken over by the military. And our friends in Colorado Springs, where the U.S. Space Command was headquartered at Peterson Air Force Base, we put our heads together, seeing that we were about the only 2 groups in the country that was consistently working on space issues. And so we said we've got to take this out to a larger audience around the world, we realized that as satellites orbit the Earth, they beam their information down just below them. And so as a result, the U.S. has had to set up what are called downlink stations around the planet, bases that radar installations that receive the information. You have one of those here in your state out at Cape Cod called PAVE-PAWS. These are now being adapted and modified and upgraded to essentially help coordinate Star Wars. And so we connected with people all over the planet where these things are located: Greenland, England, Australia, Germany, many other places as well. And that became essentially the global network that today has 150 affiliate groups. So I'm going to first talk to you about Raytheon, then about how their work on space technology fits into the larger U.S. military strategy, and then finish up with an example of how we can organize to stop these developments. Just a warning to you, please don't get hung up on trying to remember any of the weapon systems I name and the roles that they have. I'm going to name several. Don't get real hung up on that. Just try to focus more on the broad outlines of the U.S. military strategy that is now under development and Raytheon's role in it. Let me begin by reading to you from Raytheon's 2009 annual report how they describe themselves, and copies of this particular section, what they say about the Tewksbury facility, are on the literature table in the back. Raytheon is a leader in a broad range of missile defense technologies and initiatives, including the exo-atmospheric kill vehicle, the ground-based radar prototype, X-band radar, upgraded early warning radar, and the PAVE-PAWS early warning radar on Cape Cod for the ground-based mid-course missile defense segment. They go on, Raytheon is the prime contractor and integrator for the PAC-3 missile defense system and continues to provide the Patriot air and missile defense system for many U.S. and allied forces. And then they say Raytheon Space and Airborne Systems business is a $3 billion world leader in the design, development, and manufacture of advanced electronic systems for precision strike, missile defense, and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance applications. Key capabilities include electro-optical infrared sensors, airborne radars, solid-state high-energy lasers, precision guidance systems, electronic warfare systems, and the space-qualified systems for civil and military applications. Raytheon has divisions today in France, in England, and Canada. More than 88% of its sales went to the U.S. government in 2009. 2009 sales were $25 billion. More than 25% of Raytheon's missile systems sales are to international customers. Raytheon's the fourth largest federal government prime contractor. Raytheon is the perfect example, I believe, of corporate welfare. In July 2010, John McCain told a campaign audience that, quote, I would tell the corporations like Raytheon and Tucson, we'll cut the corporate tax rates. Raytheon makes these wonderful missiles, unquote. That's an interesting description, wonderful missiles. They build the kill vehicle for the Pentagon's missile defense system at Raytheon in Tucson. It was operationally tested at Vandenberg Air Force Base from California in June 2010. The job of the kill vehicle is to engage high-speed ballistic missile warheads in the mid-course phase of flight and to destroy them using only the force of impact, what they call kinetic energy, or hit to kill. Quote, Tucson has been the site where they integrate everything, said a Raytheon spokesman in Washington. The parts come from lots of different places, but the final put together is in Tucson, unquote. The X-band radar, which provides data to the kill vehicle, and the upgraded early warning radar, the second layer in tracking incoming targets, are both made at Raytheon's Andover plant. The Raytheon developed X-band radar participated in the June test by tracking, discriminating, and assessing the target. Sea-based X-band radar is a floating, self-propelled mobile radar station, basically sitting on top of an oil tower. You know those oil towers, the one that blew up out BP's oil tower, those big gigantic things. Imagine one of those floating with a big X-band radar sitting on top of it. It's designed to operate in high winds and heavy seas. It's based at Adak Island in Alaska, but can roam over the Pacific Ocean to detect incoming ballistic missiles. The U.S. has developed another X-band radar system at the Nevatim Air Base in southern Israel, and as promised, it's an American deployment under American control, just like in Japan. The Raytheon-built system is the same radar that was deployed in northern Japan with the U.S. Pacific Air Force in 2006. The high-powered, high-frequency, transportable X-band radar is designed to detect and track ballistic missiles soon after launch. The Pentagon's Missile Defense Agency is developing a space tracking and surveillance system, which it will use to research space-based detection and tracking of ballistic missiles. Data from this STSS, as it's called, could allow interceptors to engage incoming missiles earlier in flight than would be possible with other missile detection systems. The perceived advantage of this space tracking and surveillance system is that its satellites, there'll be several of them, by operating at a lower altitude and by using long and short wave infrared sensors, will be able to acquire and track missiles in mid-course and during their boost phase, when they're much easier to see and much easier to hit. The demonstration satellites were built by Northrop Grumman and Raytheon. Raytheon will also serve as the prime mission systems integrator for all electronic and combat systems on the Zumwalt-class destroyer program, what they call DDG-1000, being built where I live in Bath, Maine, at Bath Iron Works. The cost of these ships is now well over $3 billion each. Raytheon has also been awarded $74 million to upgrade the Aegis missile defense systems on all Navy cruisers and destroyers. Raytheon is building a SM-3 missile defense system production facility at the U.S. Army's Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. The SM-3 is actually a missile, and it's the missile defense interceptor that's being mounted on board these Aegis destroyers that are made at Bath. Production of the SM-3 is expected to increase substantially over the next 10 years, following Obama's announcement of deployment of European ground-based missile shield in Poland and in Romania. Raytheon Corporation is pushing hard to internationalize the Navy Aegis SM-3 program, and it currently has a customer base that includes the Netherlands, Spain, Germany, Australia, possibly South Korea and the UK. Edward Miyashiro, Deputy General Manager for Raytheon Missile Systems, told Space News this past spring, quote, "We're the largest missile supplier in the world, and we have a number of programs that we look at for growth. We have an expanding international customer base. There are a lot of countries out there knowledgeable about what the U.S. is doing with SM-3, unquote. Raytheon got $73 million in June of 2010 to upgrade Kuwait's and Taiwan's Patriot missile defense systems. Work under the contract will be performed in Andover. Raytheon in Tucson has developed a small guided missile called the Griffin for the Pentagon to use on weapons platforms, including unmanned aerial vehicles or drones, such as the Predator drones. The Griffin's maneuverability and accuracy reduce the risk of collateral damage, the Pentagon says. and civilian casualties. William J. Lynn III is Obama's Deputy Secretary of Defense. Mr. Lynn served for 6 years on the staff of Senator Edward Kennedy as liaison to the Senate Armed Forces Committee. He served as Senior Vice President of Government Operations and Strategy at Raytheon Company. Proof that good Democrats find a comfortable home inside the military-industrial complex. It's a bipartisan, endless war system. As we learn more about what weapons corporations like Raytheon are doing, we also must put their work in the larger context of U.S. military strategy. Let me ask you a question. What is America's #1 industrial export product today? Weapons. And when weapons are your #1 industrial export product, what is your global marketing strategy for that product line? The Pentagon's been saying for some time that we're not going to have industrial jobs in the U.S. anymore. It's cheaper to move overseas, for the corporations to move offshore, where they can maximize profits internationally using cheap labor. They say that under corporate globalization, every different country is going to have a different role, a different job. They say our job in the United States is going to be security export. The Pentagon says there's a part of the world today that is not submitting to the authority of corporate globalization. They call it the non-integrating gap. And they spell out what the non-integrating gap is. They say it's the Middle East, where we invaded Iraq in 2003, and today we still have, despite what President Obama has said, 50-some thousand troops there on these permanent bases. Central Asia, where today we're building massive bases in Afghanistan, and where we have bases in some of the other stands in that part of the world. Just in recent weeks, Secretary of War Robert Gates said, we're not ever going to leave Afghanistan. Africa is part of this non-integrating gap, the Pentagon says, and you know, we've recently created a new command at the Pentagon called AFRICOM, or Africa Command. And the job of AFRICOM is to set up basing relationships with the many different countries on the African continent so that we can go in and control their resources. And finally, Latin America. Parts of Latin America, the Pentagon says, is part of this non-integrating gap. Places like Venezuela, where Hugo Chavez is not playing ball with corporate globalization. The Pentagon says that because of space technology, the difference between the various services, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, is really being rubbed out. They say that because all warfare is net-centric now, everything is coordinated by space technology, there's very little difference between a lot of the services. In 2003, when the U.S. launched the shock and awe invasion of Iraq, in that initial attack, 70% of the weapons that were used by the Pentagon were directed to their targets by space technology, by space satellites. And so the Pentagon has been saying for some time that because we can do this, because we can use space to win the wars on the earth below, we must control space, dominate space, and deny other countries access to space, that we must be the master of space. And so the Pentagon is now developing weapon systems in order to ensure that the U.S. will be able to deny other countries access to space. So again, because of this space technology, they say that there's only really going to be two branches of the military in the years ahead. One they call Leviathan. And the job of Leviathan will be to go in, just like in 2003 with shock and awe, go in with an overwhelming attack, directed by space technology, and destroy a country very quickly. And the Pentagon says we do that very well. We're very good at it. But the other service that they say we're not doing so well with is called systems administration. That after we go into Iraq and we destroy it, and we take over the country, the other part of it is systems administration, where we're going to run the country. And the Pentagon says we're not doing a very good job with that, whether it's Iraq or Afghanistan. And so today, Lockheed Martin, for example, is getting millions and millions of dollars in contracts from the Pentagon to train a new generation of soldiers in this idea of systems administration. These soldiers, the Pentagon says, will never come home. Leviathan might come home, but systems administration will never come home. And so the Pentagon says it's no worry, though, as I think Pat astutely made the point earlier, that we have an economic draft today. They don't really need a draft today because of the economy. In fact, as jobs move overseas, the Pentagon's taking all this into consideration. I heard one presentation to a room full of high-level military brass where the guy was described as Donald Rumsfeld, strategy guy, was chuckling about it. You know, these kids are just whiling away their time playing video games. They have no other future out there. There are no jobs out there. What are they going to do? Go to work at McDonald's, right? How many people can do that? So we're just going to have them flooding into Leviathan in the future. But what does it say about the soul of our nation, dear friends, when we're going to have endless war and we have to continue to kill people around the world in order to create jobs for people here at home, to build weapons at places like Raytheon, and to put people into the military to go and fight and kill for these corporations? We all know that fossil fuels are a declining natural resource on our fragile Mother Earth. Many experts say we've reached the peak of oil availability and are now quickly heading down the hill towards scarcity at the time that global demand for oil is actually growing. Noam Chomsky says U.S. foreign policy today is all about controlling most of the world's oil supply as a lever of world domination. One way to keep Europe and China and India and other countries in emerging markets dependent on the U.S. and in sync with our foreign policy is to maintain control of the oil supply they're reliant on. So even as the U.S. economy is collapsing today, the Pentagon appears to be confidently saying that whoever controls the keys to the world's economic engine still remains in charge. And so that is our military strategy today. China, for example, imports 80% of its oil along the East China Sea. If any competitor nation was able to militarily control that transit route and choke off China's ability to bring in their oil, its economy could be held hostage. Many thus wonder if the current doubling of U.S. military presence in the Asian Pacific region today is really due to North Korea's nuclear program, or is it actually part of a larger military strategy to ensure U.S. control of China? Jeju Island in South Korea, a small island, relatively small island just south of the peninsula, is a place where a Navy base is being built for Aegis destroyers that are outfitted with missile defense systems. It's being built by the South Korean government. Well, we had our members in the United States several months ago call the South Korean embassy in Washington in support of the villagers, the farmers and fishermen in this little village called Gangjang on Jeju Island who are fighting and resisting this Navy base being built there. And our people were told several times when they called the South Korean embassy, well, don't call us, call your government. They're forcing us to build this base for the Aegis destroyers, outfitted with these SM-3 missiles that Raytheon is building. Russia has the world's largest deposits of natural gas and significant supplies of oil. The U.S. has recently built military bases in Romania and Bulgaria and will soon be adding more in Albania. NATO intends to expand eastward into Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, right on Russia's border. Georgia and the Ukraine are next on the list to become members of what is quickly becoming a global NATO military alliance. U.S. missile defense systems are being used to surround China and Russia today. naval Aegis destroyers with missile defense systems are being plunked down just off the coast of China, as I said earlier, but also now in the Baltic Sea. Under Obama's recent decision, we're going to put them in the Baltic Sea, just off the shores of Russia. Patriot PAC-3 missiles will be deployed in Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea. PAC-3 missiles will be deployed in Poland, 35 miles from the Kaliningrad-Russia border. They're all about boost phase missile defense. Hit them as soon as the missile is launched. Don't wait until it gets way up into deep space, which has been, that testing program has been problematic. It's difficult to have a bullet hit a bullet in deep space when they're traveling at more than 15,000 miles an hour. Decoys can be launched, and can the hit-to-kill mechanism differentiate between what's real and what isn't? But when you get close to the so-called offending country, you get right on their borders and right off their shores with these missile defense systems, and anything is launched, the rocket is very slow and fire is coming out of the rear end of it, so it's easily detected, and it's very easy to hit at that point in time. In fact, that program of boost phase missile defense has been testing quite well for the Pentagon. All of this, again, just like drones, coordinated and directed by space satellite technology. It's what the Pentagon calls the sword and the shield. Missile defense is part of U.S. first strike planning. Let me tell you about a war game that the Space Command has been waging every year for the last many years now, set in the year 2016. They call it the red team versus the blue team. And in this war game, the Space Command launches a first strike attack on China. The first weapon that is used is what's called the successor to the shuttle, the military space plane. It flies through space all the way to the other side of the Earth, comes down and drops a devastating attack on China, on one of their nuclear missiles. That admittedly, they have 20 of them that are capable of reaching the west coast of the United States today. And in this first strike attack, first the military space plane and then other weapon systems are used to try to take out China's 20 nuclear missiles. But in the war game, some of them, China is able to fire a couple of them off in a retaliatory strike. That is then when the missile defense systems go to work. This is the only time that it's practical to use a missile defense system. And after China then tries to fire its few remaining retaliatory missiles, the missile defense systems parked in Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, on ships off the coast, take them out for a successful first strike attack. Now, some people say to me, Bruce, you're getting paranoid. You're getting too paranoid. The United States would never launch a first strike attack on a sovereign nation. We would never, it would be illegal under international law.
And it doesn't have oil.
But of course, we know that that's exactly what we did in Afghanistan and Iraq and in many other countries in our lifetimes. Russia, of course, and China are not particularly pleased by this whole arrangement. Russia, I think, exceedingly worried because they're not only seeing the United States surrounding them, but they're seeing NATO now surrounding them. Russia has recently been saying to the Obama administration, I thought you said you were going to push the reset button. I thought we were going to reset relations. This doesn't look like a reset to me. Russia is saying, you know that new START treaty that we just signed to reduce both sides' nuclear missiles? If you go forward with these missile defense deployments surrounding us, have us reduce our nuclear retaliatory capability by signing this new START treaty, we're in trouble. You then have first strike advantage on us. And so Russia is saying, wait a minute now, we've got to begin to reconsider this New START treaty. Well, I just had a phone call 2 days ago from PSR chapter, Physicians for Social Responsibility in Maine, asking for my support in their campaign to get our 2 senators, Snow and Collins, to vote in favor of the New START treaty. And I said, well, you know, let me ask you a question. Have you heard that Obama has given the Department of Energy laboratories massive infusion of hundreds of millions of dollars for new generations of nuclear weapons to buy them off to support, so they'll support the New START treaty? No, he didn't know that. And I said, and what do you know about the missile defense deployments and their impact on the New START treaty? Well, I don't know anything about that. Well, the fact is, Russia is getting ready to pull out of the treaty before it's even signed by the United States Senate. And it would seem to me that as we're talking about this New START treaty in this country, whether or not it should be ratified by the United States Senate, shouldn't we be considering the larger picture here? In fact, the Republicans' main line of opposition to New START is that it's going to mess up our plans to deploy missile defense around Russia. And General James Jones, the National Security Advisor, former commander of NATO, but the National Security Advisor for Obama, went before the Congress and implored them to understand that the New START treaty would not in any way have any impact whatsoever on U.S. missile defense deployments. In fact, he said it's going to make testing these systems even easier because of the language in the treaty. When I lived in Florida for 30-some years, but I moved to Maine about 8 years ago. And when I first got there, one of the leading peace activists in the state told me that we can't get anybody in Maine to talk about nuclear weapons anymore. Nobody wants to talk about it. And I said to this particular person, well, what do they want to talk about? And she said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, what are people talking about? Well, I'm not sure. So I said, well, let's just listen. Let's hear. And what we heard 8 years ago was people were talking about jobs. People, you know, not just today are talking about jobs, but they've been in Maine talking about jobs for a long time, as most of the jobs have left the country. Manufacturing is gone, right? So I said, why don't we talk about, or why don't we put our peace work in the context of what people are talking about, these jobs? Why don't we talk about conversion of the military-industrial complex? And so we began a campaign over the last some years in Maine to talk about the idea of conversion of the military production system. Our position was that military spending is capital intensive. It eats up a lot of money and creates few jobs. We knew that because Seymour Melman years ago at Columbia University, the father of economic conversion, was talking about that forever. Every other kind of production, he said, was labor intensive. Well, recently we, fortunately, thanks to UMass Amherst economics department, they came out with a study that updated Melman's work. And they said, yes, it's true. It's true. You spend $1 billion on military production. It's absolutely true. You create 8,555 jobs. Absolutely right. But, they said, you spend that same $1 billion on home weatherization, which in Maine is really urgently needed because we have the country's oldest housing stock. Our homes are leaking heat in the winter. And the study said you hire people to go in and do home weatherization, you create more than 12,000, almost 13,000 jobs per $1 billion. Or at a place like Bath Iron Works, instead of building Aegis destroyers for endless war, if you were to build a rail system in Maine, the old-timers in Maine say there used to be a rail system in the state that connected every corner of the state. But we don't have that any longer. But if you created a rail system in Maine, spend that $1 billion, you'd create 19,000, almost 20,000 jobs per $1 billion. So we started asking people around the state, which would you rather have? 8,555 jobs, or 12,000, or even 19, almost 20,000 jobs? Which would you rather have? And I think the answer is fairly obvious. Most people can count. They understand. But unfortunately, most people don't know anything about this. You're not going to see the major newspapers or the television stations talk about any of this. It's really up to us. Democratic Party isn't going to talk about it. The politicians in the Democratic Party are on their bended knees, praying and begging for more military-industrial complex dollars in their districts. So we have to do that job. So we kind of graduated a year ago, last November. We graduated from our conversion campaign to a new campaign that we call Bring Our War Dollars Home. And we began focusing even more around the state. We created a website. We got virtually all the peace groups in Maine to sign on to this, to work together, to have a unified voice across the state, across our 2 congressional districts. And in the recent vote, just I guess about 2 months ago, on the war supplemental, another $37 billion war supplemental, both of our congresspersons voted no. They voted against it. We should recognize that the American people are like fishermen, casting about, looking for answers. They're confused. They don't know who to believe. Recent polls say that about 70% of the Americans who are Democrats don't trust their party, and about 70% of the Republicans don't trust their party either. So we have bipartisan distrust amongst the people. But who out there has any answers? Who out there has a transformative, positive vision for the future? Nobody's talking about it. And I say that's our job. I know the peace movement is always putting out fires. That's our #1 job. We're the best fire people that there are around. We're really good at it, and we've been doing it a long time. But I say to you, and I say this in a friendly way, it's someone that's been all over this country for a long time. I still go to vigils where people still are using the same signs they were using in 2003. No blood for oil. Bring the troops home. War is not the answer. But you know what I think? By now, most of the public is driven by those signs innumerable times. They got it. They got the message. They've internalized it. The polls are showing that 70% of the American people think Afghanistan's a mess. So let's teach them something new. Let's teach them about this idea of conversion and bring our war dollars home. Let's give them some new information, something they haven't heard yet, all right? That we can get more jobs with our tax dollars at a time when the American people are crying out for jobs. Let's help them see that link, connect those dots. That's our job. If we do that, we're going to go a long way. 45 states today are in a fiscal crisis. We're seeing massive cuts in education, tuition increases at colleges and universities across the country, human services cuts, roads and bridges and sewer systems and water systems in a state of collapse, public hospitals and libraries closing down. And now the Obama administration has created the Social Security Commission to go after Social Security and the other entitlement programs. You know, some years ago, I subscribed to an industry publication called Space News. And I like to keep an eye on what they're saying. And some years ago, they had an editorial on their editorial page called Mars Missions Are Affordable. And it was a very defensive editorial. They said, look, we understand these Mars missions that we're talking about are hugely expensive. And we realize we've got to come up with a dedicated funding source. And we have. And we're now sending our lobbyists to Washington to secure that funding source. And they said, it is the entitlement programs, which officially are Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and what's left of the welfare program after Bill Clinton got finished with it. These are the programs that the military-industrial complex has targeted to pay for their ambitions in space. because they say that space technology, space warfare, Star Wars, will be the largest industrial project in the history of the planet Earth. And so where will that money come from? It's going to cost so much that even after we go after Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and welfare, it's still not enough money. They're out now, they're sending the Pentagon out around the world to round up the posse, to get other countries involved to help pay for the program. Tomorrow I'm flying to India, where I'm doing a 2-week tour around India, because India is now being dragged into this program. Because, why, you know, a lot of corporations are going over there creating jobs. Their government has more money now in taxes. We got to get that money back for the military-industrial complex. Obama's going over there in November, and he's taking with him a package, a $10 billion arms sales package, a lot of which is going to be for space technology. Every year, the Global Network has an international conference, usually in the spring in a different part of the world. Last year, we met in South Korea. We try to go into places where things are really jumping and really happening. This year, we were going to go to India this week in October during Keep Space for Peace Week. We had it all scheduled. It was going to be in Nagpur. We had hosts, a couple different national peace groups were hosting us. But for some weird reason, in the so-called democracy of India, they have to have permission in order to hold an international conference. And so they started the process many months ago, and they got the bureaucratic runaround, go to this department, go to that one, go to there, and finally they were turned down. No, you can't have it. And we came to realize that the reason why was because in October we were going to go there and bring people, our leaders from around the world, from different countries, to India to talk about what they were doing with space. They're creating a space command now. And Obama was going in November, and they didn't want that bad, you know, bad vibe. So there we are. So they're going to still hold a conference. They're holding a national conference. I'm the only one going from our organization. This Raytheon, they're right smack dab in the middle of all of this stuff. They're in the middle of what we're doing with Russia. They're in the middle of what we're doing with China. Why couldn't we hold our conference right outside the doors of Raytheon? Why couldn't we hold it here? Well, what I'd like to ask you all to do is to think about this request, that we would work together and we would bring people from around the United States and from around the world, people from India, from Korea, from Japan, from England, from Germany, from other places around the world, our leaders that work on these space issues, and then people from around the United States. And we would bring them to this community. One day, let's say on a Friday, we'd hold a protest, a vigil outside of Raytheon. On Saturday, we'd have a day-long conference. On Sunday, we would have our annual Global Network business meeting. So I would ask that you all might consider that. We've done them all over this country, and usually they're great success. And usually they help enliven the local community and bring more people out. And most importantly, they help extend the information flow. You know, you're hearing from people who are having the deployments in their backyard that are being built here, and you know, those kind of links between people I think are very important. I made a promise to myself that every time I speak, I will always talk about climate change, because I do believe that we have a crisis on this earth today, and it's called climate change. We had the hottest summer in Maine recorded history this year. You all probably had the hottest summer in Massachusetts history, I would venture to guess. We've been mysteriously noticing lately palm trees coming out of the ground, and orange trees and grapefruit trees and lemon, banana trees popping up in our backyard. I mean, it's just amazing. Some people in Maine are starting to kind of like the idea, you know. There's been talk of building a Disney World, you know, somewhere near Bangor. You know. When I'm thinking about India, you know, they got 300 million poor people in that country. country. I've been there once before, and I was just completely overwhelmed seeing people taking baths on the public sidewalk. Usually I traveled from one place to the other at night, going to the train station on the platforms. You can imagine a platform here, a platform there. The platform's completely filled with people sleeping there. And as you walk to the train, you literally had to step over bodies of families sleeping there on the platforms. 300 million. Some friends have told me that number is conservatively off. It's many more than that. And now we're dragging them into Star Wars, when we should be dragging them into dealing with climate change so that there can be a future for the people on this planet. And we could be doing all these things, public transportation and wind turbines in a solar society. Imagine putting a solar device on every building in America. Imagine that. Could be done. Imagine the jobs created. Imagine the oil wars we don't have to have as a result of that. It's just unbelievable. And we're going just the opposite direction, just the wrong way. Going to fight to the last dying person for oil, just so they can extract that last dollar for oil. It's insane. We can't let them do it. We just can't let them do it. And the public, I think, is listening more than we think they are. We got a governor's race right now in our state that's got a Republican. He had a 20-point lead 2-3 weeks ago. He's a fascist. He's a total fascist. Now they say even Steven. So, but you know, the Tea Party, those people, you know, they're not all like evil people. You know, a lot of them are just good people that want answers. You know, they're upset. They should be upset. They should be outraged. And they're looking for answers, and nobody's got them. You know, it's the same old BS from all the politicians. So, I think that's our job. Anyway, thanks for listening to me rant. Thank you. Say the first thing we have to do is redefine the language. It's like I never use the word defense budget. I don't like to use that word because it's not. I like to use the word military budget or Pentagon budget or war budget. So when they talk about missile defense, we've got to start calling it missile offense so that we reverse the thinking, okay? Because right now they got everybody thinking that, oh, well, you know, it's just normal U.S. procedure. We're just defending always, you know, when it's really not that at all. It's first strike. And so then we have to also introduce that word, first strike. It's part of U.S. first strike planning. It's part of first strike system. And I don't worry so much about convincing that person right in that moment to get them to agree with me and everything else. I want to get them to think about it because I know this works. You see, because my own story, remember I was a young Republican for Nixon who joined the military in January 1971. I wanted to be a career man like my dad in the Air Force. I flunked my induction physical. I had to get a waiver to get into the military when everybody else was trying to stay out. So, but it was that I had a good heart. I was an open-minded person. And when I got to the barracks where I was stationed in California, and the GIs would have meetings in my room, as it turned out, I was in the room with the leading anti-GI resistance movement organizer in the barracks. And they would have meetings in there at night, and it turned my life around, the things they were talking about, because it made sense. I could understand it. But it took a little while, right? I didn't, you know, it wasn't overnight. So I think we have to have faith in people, tell them the truth, and then let them figure it out. That's the Achilles heel. And see, you know, I know a lot of people think, oh my God, everything he told us is so depressing. But you have to remember there's always an Achilles heel to everything. And the Achilles heel to this system, to this plan, to this empire, military empire that's being set up, the Achilles heel is the money. And they're making their contingency plans. They're going after, as I said, the entitlement programs. They're bringing in the allies to help. They're trying to cover their bases. But one of my friends that works at BIW where I live, he's worked there for 30 years. He told me recently that they've canceled all overtime. Overtime was a big deal at BIW. They've canceled all of it, which means that they're in big trouble. This DDG-1000 ship cost them $3 billion, rumored to maybe even go up to $6 billion per ship. They're beginning to get worried that they're not going to have enough money for it. And so the Pentagon is increasingly under pressure. And just the Washington Post, maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago, ran a story that Gates was going to do some cutting of the military budget. But they went on to say that it was really a preemptive strike, that they were going to cut a little bit of money, a couple $100 million in a $1 trillion budget is peanuts. But they were going to do that because they knew that the pressure was growing around the country because the public was starting to get angry about the fiscal crisis, and that they had to make some moves. So they're trying to make a few superficial moves. But I tell people all the time, there will be no recovery in America. When they talk about recovery, forget it. There can't be. It's impossible. How can there be when the jobs are moving overseas? Recover to what? The only way there's going to be recovery is if we convert the military-industrial complex and create jobs building things we need to deal with climate change. That's the only way there's going to be recovery in America. And that has to be up front. That's what this is. It has to be up front in our peace movement articulation right now. That statement, that demand, that has to be #1 articulation, I think, today of the. If you want to stop anything in the Congress of the United States, you have to cut the funding. And it's the House of Representatives that have the obligation to bring forward all fiscal bills. That's their job. All the funding starts in the House. So if you can cut the war in Afghanistan funding in the House, you don't need the Senate. If you can cut Star Wars research and development in the House, you don't need the Senate. All right? Because you cut it in the House, it doesn't go anywhere if you can cut it in the House. So a growing number of us organizers around the country are saying that we need to stop worrying about the Senate, stop worrying about Obama, because we have very little influence over them. At least with the House, they're smaller districts. We have some better chance of being able to get them turned around. And in the last vote on that war supplemental, I forgot the exact number, but it was about 100 members of the House voted no on that $37 billion war supplemental. Our particular congresswoman in my district, Shelley Pingree, first term, new at it, she was waffling back and forth, saying nice things in public, but when we would send people to meet with her or her staff, they would not commit to her voting against it. And we had been dogging her around the state. We've got 3 banners that say, "Bring our war dollars home." We were in the 4th of July parades around the state. We dropped 10,000 door hangers on doors around the state, pizza-style door hangers, with a little hole in them. Put them on the doors all over Maine. We did just a whole year campaign of all kinds of things, letter to the editor, all that stuff. And she still wasn't responding. And so we found out she was having a fundraiser at this rich developer's house. And so about 6 or 7 of us went to the fundraiser. It's way out in the country, private lane, so people had to park their cars on the country road and then walk up to the private lane to the house. And so we were right there early at the beginning of the private lane. So they all had to walk right by us. So about 75 of her best, wealthiest donors walking right by us, and we talked to every single one of them. Shelley Pingree won't come out against the war funding. We gave them the whole rap. And then we sent 2 people. We got a couple invitations surreptitiously, and we sent 2 people inside. One of them is a member of Code Pink, so she's dressed in pink. She has a pink apron on, and she's got our door hangers in her apron. And so because she just happened to be the first person to arrive at the party, the people hosting the party thought she was part of the scene, you know, just a little fun thing, entertainment or something. So as every person arrived, she stood by the door and handed them a door hanger. And is talking to them, okay? And then finally, the last person who arrived was Shelley Pingree. Drives up in their fancy SUV. She jumps out and starts getting hot and bothered with us at her fundraiser. And then finally she went in, and she gets out of the van, goes in the house, and there's our person standing at the door, handing out the door hangers. Well, I want you to know that within a week, we were told that she was going to vote against the war supplemental. And the reason was because her campaign donors told her, do it. That's right. And so the other day, we were at the Common Ground Fair. There were 27,000 people there last weekend. And Veterans for Peace and Bring Our War Dollars Home. We had a double table. And Shelley Pingree comes walking by with her fiancé. And I heard her say to him, "These people are everywhere." Because she's seen us everywhere, all right? And so this is what it takes. It takes us to get out and work harder than we've ever worked before, and to be more serious than we've ever been before, and to really make these fiscal connections and get people talking about it. And I believe that in a lot of places, maybe not every place, maybe not Tennessee or Georgia, but maybe Massachusetts and Maine and a lot of other states, that we can begin to pick off enough members of the House to be able to cut some of these military funding bills. And as we do that, then I think that we can build on that. If I could get a picture of you all standing in front of a Raytheon sign, holding this sign, because I promise you that I would immediately send this picture to Japan and to South Korea and to Poland, and these people would be thrilled to see that connection. And that would be one way we begin to promote Raytheon and Andover and all that.
I've got a feeling I've been here before, in a jungle, in a dirty little war. Young men can die so fast, my God, let's not repeat the past. I got a feeling I've been here before. Congress, can you hear the uproar? Commies coming through every door. Dominoes will fall again, Marines will need a few good men. I got a feeling I've been here before. Soldiers ready to come ashore. Students yelling, stop the war. Clergy preaches war's a sin. Generals say this time